Hey guys, today we're going to be doing a review of these gravity feed markers from Japan. So they're similar in build to a jumbo pilot marker in that they have these large 15mm nibs and then smaller uses of the nib depending on your angle of use. Just like a pilot marker, they're gravity feed, meaning the ink will flow from the base to the nib. Sometimes these type markers are a bit drier and a bit streakier, but I haven't really experienced that with these markers. I'd definitely say just break in the nib a bit more so the ink can flow to all places in the nib, and then you'll end up with a lot more consistent lines. You can go ahead and refill these markers as well by just unscrewing the top like this and placing your own ink inside, but I definitely suggest sticking to thinner inks just to assist with the gravity feed. All the colours seem quite true to themselves. The yellow, the blue and the red are interesting primary colours and pop off the surface quite well. And then the more typical colours like the black and the blue work well as well. Just like most inks, the smell is a bit potent, so I definitely suggest outdoor use only, nothing like black books or anything like that. But we'll get into a full review of all the colours and the buff test. So first off guys, let's start with the red. I really like the colour. It's more of a matte finish rather than a sort of glossy, shiny finish, and the colour itself is kind of between a red and orange. But other than that, there's not many streaks to it, both in the wider use of the marker and the smaller use. They both come out crispy and looking nice on the surface. One thing I did notice with all these colours is you kind of have to tend to break in the marker a bit more to get less streaks. It means less crispy lines, but you're just going to get less of a choppy stroke and less streaks as well. So next up we have this light blue. It's more of a cyan aqua type blue, but it's really popping off the surface well. I was having some worries initially, thinking that it might not work well on a light surface, but it definitely seems to be popping off the surface well, and it seems like a colour that could really stand out on the streets if you go tagging with it. It's not as opaque as some of the other colours. You kind of see the brush strokes a bit more, but that could just be a case of the nib not being broken in as much as say the red, but definitely a great colour. So next up we have the black. This seemed to be the most streaky or choppiest of all the markers, potentially because the nib hasn't been broken in enough. So that's something you can do, just rub it on the concrete for a bit to then break in the nib and make sure the lines are flowing nicely. But the black itself is glossy, it's opaque, it's standing well on the surface, it's not sort of being eaten into the surface, which is good to see. And yeah, overall it has a nice shine to it, nice tinge to it. So definitely enjoying the black, just needs to be broken in a bit more. Next up we have the dark blue. This is a nice colour, and it's something I experimented with. I added my own ink to this marker so we can see it's flowing a bit better, especially because that ink was quite thin. So that's something you can go ahead and do. It creates nice tinges of colour between this sort of dark blue and the black, so you can go ahead and start mixing colours. Also, I've worn this nib in a bit more than some of the others, and it has led to the line work being kind of more rounded off, but it leads to more consistent and less streaky lines in my opinion, so that's something you can go ahead and do. So last up we have the yellow, and yellows typically have a hard time working, especially as an ink, and especially showing up on lighter and darker surfaces. They don't seem to be as opaque as most of the other colours, but this colour is working quite well on this light surface. It's popping off. One thing I did notice with this yellow is that the nib itself tends to pick up a lot of the dirt and dust on the surface, meaning that the marker has a hard time working, especially at the beginning of this tag. But once you fight through that, it does come through as a nice colour and nice consistent lines. So definitely an interesting colour to try out.
So I've left these markers to bake in the sun for a couple of days just to check how UV resistant they are, and they all seem to be holding up quite well, especially the blue, dark blue, black and yellow. But if we look to the red, it's become a lot darker than it once was. It's not as vibrant, not as glossy, and if we look really closely, some of the strokes of the marker seem to be coming out a lot more and being a lot more visible than they once were. This is typical with most reds. I think they have a hard time dealing with being sun resistant, and this has only been a few days, so who knows what the effect could be after a long period of time. So that's just something to be wary of.
So first up we're just going to buff it with some chemical buff, just some standard turpentine, methylated spirits. So we'll go ahead, put that on a rag, see how it goes. Alright guys, so the results are pretty apparent. The light blue is not working at all. It just seems to get wiped straight off the surface with the chemical buff. The other colours like the red, the yellow, the black and the dark blue are working well. I've managed to get a bit off the surface, but you can still read the tag and it's quite visible. It's kind of odd that you think that an ink across all its colours should have the same buffing properties, but in this case it's just one colour that seems to be working quite badly. The rest are working okay. Alright guys, so we'll go ahead and give all the colours a buff with just normal paint, another method of buffing, just to see how they hold up. So we've given the paint about 30 minutes to dry off, and as you can see the results are quite disappointing. Nothing is coming through as a very visible or readable tag. You can see a bit of the brush strokes of the red and the black, but nothing that could be truly considered as a ghost tag, especially when we compare this to other inks where those inks tend to bleed through the buff quite quickly and quite noticeably. This is kind of disappointing, and especially considering that this is a very light blue that it's being buffed with, so it should have the best chance to come through, and it's still not. So in terms of a paint buff, the Magic Ink isn't doing too well. So thanks for watching the video guys. Comment any suggestions for other videos or other reviews down below, and I plan to be making a lot more videos like this, so any of your support helps. Thanks.